Gran Turismo 2 is far from a polished game. Its rushed development is well documented, with its typos, lack of event entry restrictions, cheating AI, and weird exhaust sounds having become notorious amongst the GT community over the years. However, there's one bug that rarely gets talked about that can greatly affect your car's performance. In fact, it's a bug that was carried over from the first Gran Turismo, but polyphony never patched out until years later. Today, we'll be looking at this bug in detail, the ride height trick. When you lower a car's ride height on both sides, the car will appear lower to the ground in-game, and vice versa. Lowering the height improves the car's responsiveness, making it feel more snappy and allowing it to hold a tighter line around corners. This seems to work as intended, even though GT2's simulation of weight transfer is much more simplistic than later games. There's generally little to no drawback to setting the height as low as possible, while in later GT games, this will often lead to unpredictable handling over bumps, and the inability to move the car's weight around while entering corners. What happens if you lower one side while raising the other? If you raise the front height while lowering the rear, this will be represented in-game. However, if you start a machine test while letting go of the accelerator, you'll notice some strange behaviour. The car will begin driving backwards, as if it's falling downhill, despite the road being completely flat. What we're most interested in is if you lower the front and raise the rear. If we perform the same test, the car will begin moving forwards by itself, as if it's rolling down a hill. If we compare this ride height setup with a flat setup, it's multiple tenths faster in the 1000-meter sprint due to this phenomenon. This is the ride height trick. Because you're making the car point downwards by lowering the front height, the game believes that the car is in a constant state of going downhill. This results in a boost in acceleration. The inverse applies when the front height is raised, as the game thinks the car is going uphill, reducing acceleration. The ride height trick was first documented around 2001 on the Gran Turismo by Numbers forums. Gasman's tuning guide was the primary resource for GT2 tuning at the time, and it discussed the trick in the Secrets of GT2 tuning section and how it enables supreme acceleration. The forums became less active over the years though, and much of this info was nearly lost to time. Raising the rear height while lowering the front does have some intended side effects. The ride height affects the car's centre of gravity, and raising one side shifts the car's weight towards the opposite axle. This means that raising the rear height induces understeer, as the car becomes more nose-heavy and is unable to pivot as easily. The acceleration boost generally outweighs the costs, however. The understeer can be dealt with by softening the car's suspension, or on race cars, lowering the rear downforce. The trick is less of a detriment to cars with a rear heavy distribution, as it brings them closer to a 50-50 distribution for more balanced handling. Interestingly, the ride height trick doesn't seem to affect the car's traction while launching and exiting corners, regardless of drivetrain. Rear-wheel drives benefit just as much as front-wheel drives, despite the centre of gravity being moved away from the driving wheels. This quirk seems to be exclusive to GT2, as cars would have their traction affected by ride height adjustments in later games. As well, some cars seem to gain little to no benefit from the ride height trick. One of the most notable examples is the Escudo Pikes Peak, which sees less than a tenth of improvement in the 1000-meter sprint. It's always worth checking whether the car's acceleration improves enough to justify the less precise handling. Despite these edge cases, if you want to min-max your car's performance, you'll need to build its setup around the ride height trick. I've completed many GT2 challenges on this channel, and all of the setups I've used have incorporated the trick. Thanks to the acceleration boost, it's possible to win many events despite having half the power the AI has, like beating 700 horsepower race cars with a 253 horsepower FTO. I also routed the GT2 any percent speed one to buy the semi-racing suspension kit for the workhorse Silvia S13, as it allows for limited ride height adjustment. The acceleration boost can be felt all throughout the run. Where the ride height trick differs from something like the gear trick is that it was clearly never intended by the developers. It's a consequence of the game checking whether the car's nose is pointing up or down to determine whether it's going uphill or downhill. As mentioned earlier, the trick was introduced in Gran Turismo 1, and it went undetected throughout GT2's development. It makes prioritizing the semi-racing suspension kit a key component to success in the early game, as I talked about extensively in my Gran Turismo 1 Ultimate Guide. The trick is especially helpful in the test course race in Mega Speed Cup, as the understeer caused by front heaviness isn't an issue here. Gran Turismo 3 attempted to patch out the ride height trick. If you try to apply the trick, the car will always appear to have a flat height in-game. This means that there's no way to trick the game into thinking the car is going uphill or downhill. However, it ended up creating a new issue in the process. The car's centre of gravity is purely determined by the front height, and the rear height has no effect on traction. This means that a low front height will always cause front heaviness, regardless of what the rear height is set to. Conversely, a high front height causes rear heaviness. To reduce wheel spin, you'll want to set the front height as high as possible on rear-wheel drives, and as low as possible on front-wheel drives. Most FRs work well with a max front height and min rear, the inverse of the ride height trick, as this improves traction without sacrificing the car's responsiveness. At just both heights, the car rotates well without feeling floaty or snappy. Right height physics be completely reworked for Gran Turismo 4 onwards. Right height now properly affects the car's centre of gravity without any glitches. Lowering the height below 100 often has a negative impact on handling, as it can limit the car's freedom of movement and cause it to overreact to bumps. To summarise, the right height trick is game changing when building optimal tuning setups, but you need to build around it or it can negatively affect your car's handling. Try it out for yourself to see how it makes many cars surprisingly viable in late game events. If you want to see more demonstrations of how it works, I've uploaded a video to my second channel with some comparisons. That's all for now, thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions down below and I'll see you in the next video.